The moment still plays in my mind like a scene I can't pause. Lucas was standing so close I could feel the warmth of his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. I've wanted this for months. At the time, those words felt impossible. Lucas wasn't just anyone in my life. He was my boyfriend's best friend. And somehow, everything that followed started long before that moment. My name is Ethan, and for 3 years I had been in a relationship with Daniel. In the beginning, our life together felt effortless. Daniel had a way of making every ordinary day feel exciting. We'd stay up late talking about our plans for the future, sharing quiet jokes only we understood, believing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. But somewhere along the way, the warmth between us faded. It didn't happen all at once. It was slower than that, so gradual I almost didn't notice. Daniel began working longer hours. He was always checking emails, answering calls, or leaving the apartment before I had even finished my coffee. When he came home, he looked tired, distracted, like his mind was still somewhere else. At first I told myself it was temporary. Everyone gets busy. Relationships go through phases. Still, the apartment started to feel different. Silence filled the spaces where conversation used to live. Nights that once meant cooking dinner together now meant reheating leftovers while Daniel sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. We still said, "I love you." But the words had started to feel automatic. Lucas entered my life quietly, almost by accident. He and Daniel had been friends since college. I'd heard stories about him for months before I actually met him, usually told with the kind of nostalgia people reserve for their most loyal friends. When Lucas finally came over to our apartment one Friday night, he wasn't what I expected. Daniel had described him as reckless and loud, someone who turned every gathering into chaos. But the man standing in our doorway looked calm, observant, with dark eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. "Ethan, right," he said, offering a relaxed smile. His handshake was warm, confident, but not overwhelming. Something about him felt easy in a way that surprised me. That night the three of us ordered takeout and watched a movie. Daniel spent most of the evening talking about work, half listening while answering messages on his phone. Lucas, meanwhile, kept glancing toward me whenever Daniel wasn't paying attention. Not in a strange way. More like he was trying to understand me. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began visiting more often. Sometimes Daniel invited him over. Other times Lucas just stopped by after work, claiming he was in the neighborhood. What I started to notice was how different things felt when he was around. Lucas asked questions Daniel had stopped asking months ago. "How's your day been? Are you still painting? Did that job interview go anywhere?" They were simple things, but hearing them felt unexpectedly comforting. One evening Daniel came home late again, tossing his keys onto the counter without even looking up. "Lucas coming over tonight," he said quickly. "I told him he could hang here if I'm stuck finishing something." Then he disappeared into the bedroom to change. Lucas arrived 20 minutes later with a six-pack and the same relaxed smile he always carried. Daniel ended up leaving almost immediately for another work call across town, muttering apologies as he grabbed his jacket. "Don't wait up," he said before the door closed behind him. And just like that, it was only Lucas and me in the apartment. For a moment we both stood there in awkward silence. Lucas broke it first. "Guess it's just us tonight." I laughed softly, trying to ignore the strange nervous energy in the room. "Looks like it." We ended up talking longer than I expected. Hours passed while we sat on opposite sides of the couch, sharing stories about work, childhood memories, and the little frustrations that make adulthood more complicated than anyone warns you about. Lucas listened carefully, leaning forward when I spoke, like every word mattered. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. At some point our conversation slowed, the room growing quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Lucas looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Not uncomfortable, just lingering. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I looked away, suddenly aware of something I didn't fully understand. When Daniel finally returned after midnight, Lucas was already gathering his jacket. "See you later," he said casually, heading for the door. But before he left, his eyes met mine again. There was something unspoken there, something neither of us acknowledged. At the time, I told myself it meant nothing. Just a moment, just coincidence. But as the door clicked shut behind him, a quiet thought settled in the back of my mind. Something had shifted, and whether I wanted it to or not, Lucas had just become the one person in my life I couldn't stop thinking about. After that night, Lucas started appearing more often. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. He and Daniel had always been close, and our apartment had become a casual meeting place long before I came along. But gradually I noticed a pattern. Lucas tended to show up on evenings when Daniel was running late or working overtime. Daniel didn't seem to notice anything unusual about it. If anything, he seemed relieved that someone was keeping me company while he was gone. "Lucas is good people," Daniel said one evening while rushing out the door again. "He hates being alone as much as you do." I smiled and nodded, but something about the comment stayed with me long after he left. Because the truth was, Lucas and I had started talking in a way that went beyond casual conversation. It began harmlessly enough. We'd sit in the living room with a couple of drinks, exchanging stories about work or childhood memories. Lucas had a quiet humor that crept up on you unexpectedly, and before long I realized I was laughing more during those evenings than I had in months. Daniel used to be the one who made me laugh like that. One night Lucas noticed the half-finished canvas leaning against the wall near the window. "You paint?" he asked. "Used to," I replied. The answer came out sharper than I intended. I hadn't touched a brush in nearly a year. At some point life had become too crowded with responsibilities, routines, and the subtle exhaustion that comes from feeling unseen. Lucas studied the canvas for a moment. "You should start again," he said. I shrugged. "Daniel thinks it's a waste of time." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. It felt disloyal to say something like that about Daniel, especially to his closest friend. But Lucas didn't look surprised. Instead, his expression softened. "Not everything has to be useful," he said quietly. "Some things just need to matter." For reasons I couldn't explain, that sentence stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, our conversations deepened. Lucas spoke about his own life in pieces, never dramatic, never self-pitying. He told me about relationships that had burned out quickly, about the strange loneliness that can exist even in crowded cities, about the feeling of never quite finding the right place to belong. I found myself sharing more than I intended. One evening I admitted something I hadn't said out loud before. "Daniel and I, we're not like we used to be." Lucas didn't interrupt. He simply waited. "It's like we live parallel lives now," I continued. "Same apartment, same routines, but we barely connect anymore." Lucas leaned back against the couch, his gaze thoughtful. "That happens sometimes," he said. "But what if it doesn't fix itself?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Then you have to ask whether both people still want to fix it." His honesty startled me. Most people would have offered a quick reassurance, something comforting and vague. Lucas didn't do that. He always answered truthfully. Daniel eventually noticed how easily Lucas and I talked. One night while the three of us were eating takeout, Daniel smirked and pointed his chopsticks at us. "You two seem to get along suspiciously well." The comment was playful, but it made my stomach tighten. Lucas laughed it off immediately. "Relax. Ethan just has better taste in movies than you." Daniel rolled his eyes, amused, and the moment passed. But the joke lingered in my mind long after the conversation moved on. Because lately I had started noticing small things. The way Lucas looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way our conversations slowed when Daniel entered the room. The way silence between us sometimes felt heavier than words. One rainy evening, the three of us started watching a movie together. Halfway through, Daniel's phone rang. "Work," he muttered, standing up. "Give me a few minutes." He stepped onto the balcony, leaving the sliding door slightly open. Lucas and I stayed on the couch, staring at the flickering screen without really watching. The sound of rain tapped softly against the glass. At some point, our hands brushed. It was accidental, just a small shift as we both reached for the popcorn bowl. But neither of us pulled away immediately. For a second that felt far longer than it should have, our fingers remained close, barely touching. Then Lucas quietly moved his hand back. Not abruptly, just enough to restore the space between us. The movie continued playing, but neither of us paid attention. A strange tension filled the room, subtle yet undeniable. When Daniel returned a few minutes later, he dropped back onto the couch without noticing anything unusual. Lucas stood up soon after. "I should head out," he said. Daniel looked confused. "Already? Early morning tomorrow." Lucas grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door. But just before he left, he paused and glanced back at me. The look in his eyes was different than before. Not curiosity, not friendliness, something far more dangerous, and for the first time, I realized a truth I had been carefully avoiding. Lucas wasn't just Daniel's best friend anymore. He had become the one person I was starting to want in ways I had no right to. The night everything changed began quietly. Daniel had been sent out of town for a 2-day work trip, something that had become increasingly common over the past year. When he told me about it that morning, he sounded distracted, already focused on the meetings waiting for him in another city. "I'll be back Friday afternoon," he said while stuffing clothes into his suitcase. I nodded from the kitchen, pretending to concentrate on my coffee. In truth, the apartment already felt emptier, and he hadn't even left yet. Before walking out the door, Daniel kissed my cheek quickly. "Try not to miss me too much," he joked. The comment was meant to be light-hearted, but it carried a strange weight. I smiled anyway, watching as the door closed behind him. By evening, the quiet had settled in. I spent most of the night doing small, pointless tasks, cleaning the kitchen, reorganizing shelves, flipping through television channels without actually watching anything. The apartment felt larger when I was alone, the silence stretching through every room. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Lucas stood in the hallway. "Hey," he said, holding up a small paper bag. "Daniel left this in my car yesterday. Figured I should drop it off." For a moment, neither of us moved. The sight of him there, unexpected, familiar, sent a quiet tension through my chest. "You can come in," I said finally. Lucas stepped inside, glancing around the apartment like he was measuring the space differently tonight. "Daniel gone already?" he asked. "Yeah, left this morning." Lucas nodded slowly. "Thought so." I took the bag from him and set it on the counter, but neither of us made any move toward the door. Instead, we lingered in the living room, both aware that something unspoken had followed him inside. "You want a drink?" I asked, mostly to break the silence. Lucas hesitated before answering. "Sure." We sat on opposite ends of the couch with 2 glasses of whiskey between us. The distance felt deliberate, like we were both trying to maintain a line that had already begun to blur. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, work, the weather, a new restaurant Lucas had tried last weekend. But the conversation felt strained, as if both of us were avoiding the real topic sitting quietly between us. Eventually I set my glass down. "Why did you start avoiding me?" Lucas looked up immediately. "I wasn't avoiding you." "Yes, you were," I said calmly. "You stopped coming by. You barely answer my messages anymore." The honesty of the question seemed to catch him off guard. Lucas leaned back against the couch, running a hand through his hair. "I thought it would be better that way." "Better for who?" His eyes met mine then, steady and unguarded. "For Daniel," he said. The room fell silent again. "I didn't ask you to stay away," I said quietly. Lucas let out a slow breath. "That's the problem, Ethan." The way he said my name made something shift inside me. Lucas stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the dark street below. "I tried to ignore it," he continued. "For months." My heart began to beat faster. "Ignore what?" Lucas turned slowly to face me. The tension in his expression was unmistakable now, like a truth he had been holding back for far too long. "You really don't know?" he asked. I shook my head, though part of me already understood. Lucas stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. His voice dropped, quieter than I had ever heard it before. "I've wanted this for months." The words hung in the air between us. For a second, my mind struggled to process them. "You shouldn't say that," I whispered. "I know, but you did." Lucas nodded once, his expression conflicted but certain. "Because it's true." Every logical thought in my mind told me to walk away. Lucas was Daniel's best friend. Whatever was happening here had no safe ending. But another part of me, the part that had felt invisible for so long, refused to move. "You shouldn't want this," I said softly. Lucas took one more step forward. "Maybe not." He stopped close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty behind his eyes. "But I do." For a moment neither of us moved. Then something shifted. It wasn't dramatic or impulsive. It happened slowly, almost carefully, like both of us were aware of the exact line we were about to cross. Lucas reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. The touch was light at first, hesitant, giving me time to stop him. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. The kiss that followed was quiet but undeniable, carrying weeks of tension that neither of us had been brave enough to acknowledge before. When we finally pulled apart, the room felt different. Heavier, real. Lucas looked at me, his expression a mixture of relief and regret. "We shouldn't have done that," he said. I knew he was right. But as I stood there in the dim light of the apartment, one truth became impossible to ignore. Nothing about my life was the same anymore. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. The morning after felt heavier than the night before. I woke up earlier than usual, the grey light of dawn filtering through the apartment windows. For a moment I lay still, staring at the ceiling, hoping the previous night had been some strange dream my mind had invented out of loneliness. But the memory returned immediately. Lucas standing in the living room. His voice quiet but certain. "I've wanted this for months." And the kiss that followed. The silence in the apartment felt sharper now. Lucas had already left sometime during the night, slipping out quietly after we both realized how dangerous the situation had become. We hadn't argued. We hadn't even said much. Just a few careful sentences neither of us fully believed. "This shouldn't happen again," Lucas had said. I had nodded, even though something inside me doubted it was that simple. The rest of Daniel's trip passed slowly. Lucas didn't message me. I didn't message him either. The distance between us felt necessary, like both of us were trying to contain something that had already escaped. When Daniel returned Friday afternoon, he looked exactly the same as when he left, tired, distracted, and preoccupied with work. "Trip was exhausting," he muttered, dropping his suitcase near the door. I stood in the kitchen pretending to wipe down the counter, trying to act normal. "How were the meetings?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "Long." That was the entire conversation. The familiarity of it hit me harder than I expected. 3 years together, and now most of our exchanges felt like brief updates between coworkers. Daniel walked past me toward the bedroom. Lucas came by while I was gone. He asked casually. My chest tightened. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He dropped something off. Daniel nodded without suspicion. "Good." I was worried I left it in his car. He disappeared into the bedroom again, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For the rest of the evening, I watched Daniel move through the apartment like he always did, checking emails, answering work messages, occasionally glancing up at the television without really watching it. Nothing about his behavior suggested he sensed anything was wrong. But everything felt wrong. The secret sat between us like an invisible wall. Over the next week, Lucas stopped coming around entirely. Daniel mentioned it once while scrolling through his phone. "Haven't seen Lucas in a while," he said. "Probably busy." I nodded, though the explanation felt hollow. The truth was much simpler. Lucas was avoiding both of us. Part of me understood why. Another part of me hated the silence he left behind. Eventually the tension became impossible to ignore. One night Daniel closed his laptop and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine curiosity. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I forced a small smile. "Just tired." Daniel studied me for a moment longer. "You sure that's all?" The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, Daniel was actually looking at me, really looking. And suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. He hadn't been the only one drifting away. Our relationship hadn't collapsed overnight. It had slowly unraveled while both of us pretended everything was fine. "I think we need to talk," I said carefully. Daniel leaned back slightly, surprised by my tone. "About what?" The truth pressed against my chest, heavy and unavoidable. But the words didn't come easily.
Instead, my mind returned to that quiet moment in the living room days earlier. Lucas standing in front of me, his expression filled with a mixture of honesty and regret. "I've wanted this for months." Those words had changed everything. Not just between Lucas and me, but between Daniel and me too. Because they forced me to confront a truth I had been ignoring for far too long. I wasn't the same person I had been when Daniel and I first fell in love. And neither was he. Daniel waited patiently for me to speak, unaware that the conversation about to begin might alter all three of our lives. I looked at him across the room, realizing how fragile everything had become. Somewhere outside, a car passed down the quiet street, its headlights briefly sweeping across the living room walls. I took a slow breath, because whether I was ready or not, the truth was no longer something I could hide, and once it was spoken out loud, there would be no way to take it back.